Hey Roanoke, thank you for joining me for another episode of If You Know, You Know, a municipal podcast brought to you by the City of Roanoke. I'm your host, Carol Corbett, and I'm here to bring you all things Roanoke. We go behind the scenes and learn more about some of the good and interesting things that are happening around the Star City. And my favorite part, I get to introduce you to some of the amazing people who are serving our community and show you how the work that they are doing impacts both our city and you. Now, if you didn't grow up around Roanoke, or pay attention to the news, or follow us on social media, let me be the first to tell you, this November, Roanoke will be reflecting on the 40th year since Hurricane Juan and the locally infamous flood of '85, and how it truly wreaked havoc on our valley. If You Know is going to look at the anniversary of this event in a short 3-episode arc where we face the storm with a look into the past, a dive into how our current efforts are reducing the severity of flood events, and how we are planning for the future of the valley and our flood resiliency. For today's episode, I would like to introduce a few of our city employees who have some direct experience with the flood of '85. Chief David Hoback, Lieutenant Jennings Tardy, and Sheila Umberger. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Sheila, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm Sheila Umberger, and I'm now the director of the library for the city. Have been since 2004. I was in a different position in 1985, though.
So how long have you officially been with the city?
They hired me in 1982 to convert the card catalog to computer code.
That is a sentence we don't hear often.
I was a computer coder when I didn't know how cool that was, but yeah.
No, that's really cool. How long did it take you, do you remember, to convert?
It took us about 4 years because it was almost 500,000 records.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
I was going to think like 4 months. But
no, it was the beginning of the online system now.
That's crazy.
So that came in '89. So I was involved with that. Yeah.
So you've been with the city since '82. Okay.
August 17th.
August 17th.
We all know our date.
I'm sure. I left and came back. I have 2 dates and I get them confused all the time. Jennings, what about you?
I have been with the city I'm in year 43, June 7th, 1983.
And where do you work?
I work for the police department. I am a lieutenant and currently assigned to Patrol Bureau. I'm the executive officer.
Okay.
Patrol.
And so where were you working within the city back in '85?
I was with the police department.
Were you in patrol then?
I was.
You were?
I spent most of my life in patrol here in some fashion or another. Spent a little bit of time in the detective bureau, but primarily in patrol.
So your heart is in patrol.
It is.
Oh, love that. And Chief, what about you?
Well, I've been with the city for almost a little over 40 years. I was one of the first paid paramedics the city hired in 1985. Started January 1 in 1985. And then as we grew as an organization, and then we eventually merged into the Fire-EMS department in '95, and from there I became chief in 2007. So I've been the chief of the fire department since 2007.
And this is a side quest, but with paramedics and firefighters, now is it more common to have staff who are both, or do you still have staff who are either like just firefighters or just paramedics?
No, it's across the Commonwealth. It is very much a combined system. So firefighter EMTs, firefighter paramedics, we both do dual roles. That wasn't the case back in the 80s. The fire stayed on their side, EMS stayed on their side. So we very rarely cross paths because of the just job duties. But when we merged everything together to be a more efficient model, providing service to our community, a study recommended we do that, and that was part of that merger between the two. And then we had a new chief come in and led us through that process. And then as we grew as an organization, then moved up through the ranks and became chief in 2007.
Gotcha. Well, just so that we level set our expectations here, and I sort of mentioned this to the gentleman at the table before you got here, my experience with the flood of '85 is I was just 3 weeks old. So I was not working at the city at the time, but I think maybe my parents would know there was a future Civic employee in my soul. So I don't have many memories specifically from that time, but can you guys take me back through some of your memories? Sheila, what were you doing in November of 1985?
Well, I had my daughter. One of my daughters was 3 years old, and I had been out at Halloween in the worst rain. It rained for 2 solid weeks. I mean, it was just, I've never seen so much rain. And so my experience was the morning of the flood. They called the flood watch off, so we were all excited about that. I lived down in West Salem. We teased about that for years. It's like, gee, they called the flood. And, that was normal because it quit. But the ground was I guess the ground was saturated. So we ended up, that day, I was in the basement in the technical services area, cataloging books and working with the computer stuff. And my husband, who worked at Roanoke College, called and said, "You need to get out of there now." And I'm like, "I've got work to do." And of course, this was pre-cell phone. So he was like, "I have been trying to call for 2 hours. I haven't been able to get through." Because they had significant flooding on part of the campus at Roanoke College, like homes and everything. It was really bad. And so he told me to immediately leave. So I did. And he said, "Go by Lakeside." I'm like, I didn't do that. I heard on the radio not to do that. It was very much flooded out. But it was a good thing we had a brand new Camry. It would not have been there about an hour later. So it was really fast and not what you would expect.
What time of day was it?
That particular day, it was probably, I want to say 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Because I had a friend that went down on the city market and saw her car float by.
Oh.
I mean, it happened that fast.
Well, I guess with the ground being so saturated and then it starts again, there's nowhere far to go. I will say my first thought when you talked about your husband trying to call you, I was like, "Did you have cell service in the basement?" And then I was like, "Nope."
It was a landline.
Service. Was there issues with the landline? Like, could he not get through calling?
He couldn't get through.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea there was anything going on. I mean, it had been raining for so long that it wasn't something that was alarming us, alarming me. I was not paying attention to it at all. I was working.
Until your husband is like, "Stop and go home."
He's like, "You need to get out there immediately. It's bad."
And Lieutenant Tardy, what about you? What was your experience?
Well, the day of the flood, when the water came up, as Sheila was just talking about, I worked the night before, all night. I was on permanent midnight shift at the time. I had court literally all day. Went to court 9 o'clock, got out about 4, which didn't usually run that long. But if I recall, we had a substitute judge who liked to take his time. So I walked out at 4 o'clock, and I had not heard anything either about what was going on outside because I sat in the courtroom all day. And I went to go home. I lived out in South County in the Starkey area at that time. And it took me probably an hour, 45 minutes at a minimum, to drive from 3rd and Franklin, where the POP building is, to where I could get on 220 South, just in the 1600 block. The drive that normally takes today would take us 3 minutes at most to get there. It was close to an hour. I remember getting up on the interstate, or the expressway, not really interstate there, and I could look over and see Victory Stadium underwater. It was, I mean, the top bleachers were exposed, obviously, but it looked like
a Super Bowl?
Like Lake Erie or something over there. And so I drove home, and I don't think the drive home, I don't recall it taking terribly long. I walked in, was probably close to 5 by then, and my phone rang about 30 seconds later, and it was one of my sergeants calling me saying, "I hope you got some rest today because you need to come back in." And I told him that, I'd just gotten out of court and I had not been to sleep, so they let me sleep until about 8, and then they called and woke me up, and I came in.
Now, when it took you like an hour to get that short distance, was that because of traffic, because people were trying to get out, or was that because of like water in the road conditions?
It was water. I think it seemed, I would say it seemed like everybody in the state of Virginia had come to Roanoke and were all from Franklin Road. Obviously not, but it was just traffic. I mean, I've never seen anything like it anywhere I've ever been, and I haven't seen it since. And I've spent a fair amount of time in Northern Virginia on the Beltway, and I've never seen the Beltway like that. You'd sit still for 5 minutes, roll forward a half a car length, and then put the car back in park because you're going to be sitting there for a while.
Wow. Okay. So you were in court most of the day, kind of missed some of the high water, but really saw a lot of the effects of folks trying to flee to safety.
Yeah, and then when I came in, found a car, and marked in service and went to work. And water was down by then. It didn't stay up. It went down fairly quickly. And I remember driving out. I was assigned, we call it District 4, up in Northwest. And that was my usual assignment. So I drove out there just, to see what was going on. And I remember going down, there's a street, it's called Westside. It's all Westside Boulevard now, but the four blocks from Shenandoah down to the steel plant used to be called Miller Street. I remember driving down Miller Street, and cars were stacked as if you have a 5-year-old with his Matchbox toys, where he had just on the floor, on this table, had stacked them up neatly on top of each other, except you're looking at 4,000-pound cars. So it was like a Jolly Green Giant had come to play with cars. The water was, I can't recall exactly how high it got. I know all the first floor apartments were flooded, and it was years before they reopened those first floors. They couldn't. Trying to think, what else did I do that night? We, there are always people that will try to take advantage of situations. We ended up that night catching a couple of people for breaking into a building. You're not really breaking in, more like walking in. But Peters Creek Road used to stop at Melrose in 1985. It did not go to Brandon like it does now.
Oh, okay.
And there was a little building there that was, as I recall, it was an antique shop. Now, after the water went down, the building was basically destroyed. The walls didn't fall down, but they just sort of separated, and there was enough room to literally walk in. And we managed to catch a couple of people who had gone in and helped themselves to a bunch of antiques.
Oh.
And so I remember that, being very, very unhappy with those people, but felt good that we caught them and put them in jail. I can tell you, in case you don't know this, Brown Robertson Park, if you're familiar with that, up on 10th Street Northwest, used to be Shadeland Avenue.
Sure.
And it is now Brown Robertson Park because it flooded. That little tiny Lick Run Creek, which is, today it would probably be, 3 feet wide? I don't know, I haven't been up there in a while. It's not very big. 2 women, one named Brown, one named Robertson, drowned in their homes on Shadeland Avenue. And
is that why it's called Brown Robertson?
That's why it's called Brown Robertson Park.
I used to live off 10th Street, so going down the Lick Run Greenway and Brown Robertson Park,
that was a neighborhood in 1985.
Oh, wow.
And I remember that. I don't remember what else to do. There was a commerce. And it was, the city was for the most part a ghost town. People didn't, except for the 2 people who decided to come out and help themselves to somebody else's antiques. It was just, this was, I don't think I'm not great at expressing myself too well, about things like this, but I'd never seen, in 1977, where I grew up in Russell County, we had the 100-year flood, because they called this one a 100-year flood. This one made that other one look like just a really rainy day.
A rainy day, a nuisance.
Yeah, the city of Roanoke got obliterated. Downtown, water was probably 12 to 15 feet deep at Market Square. A lot of places closed and stayed closed for a long, long time.
Wow.
And it took a long time, for the city to come back from that. And I think that, if something else occurs to me, I'll chime in a little bit, but
we'll come back to it.
That's what I remember of it. It was, like I said, it's just hard to describe how, and let you know just how insignificant you are in the grand scheme of things on Earth.
Well, and to think about how significant it was for this area. It's still the touch point that people, harken back to. Like, you'll still hear all the time, oh, you remember the flood of 85? Were you here during the flood of 85? Did this happen during the flood of 85? Like, I can't think of another, occurrence or event that this community references as much as the flood of 85 as a touchstone.
Not in my years here that would come close to that.
And Chief, what about you? What was your night like or day like?
Well, actually, my day started, and I guess my memory started the flood of '85 on Halloween night. We had 2 firefighters who were killed by hit and run, and I was one of the medics that responded to that. Captain Cassell and firefighter Helms and a civilian were killed. And like Sheila, I remember the pouring down rain, and we weren't able to take care of the scene. It was pouring down rain that night. And then subsequent couple of days later, then we were in the process, or the city was in the process of giving the funeral for the firefighters. And I was a volunteer at Cave Spring Fire Department, so the career guys in Cave Spring, worked for the city as one of the paid paramedics. I volunteered out there, and I came back and started volunteering so the career guys could backfill for the city firefighters so they go to the funeral. And I remember I got there about 9 o'clock, and the tone started dropping, and just call after call after call, and you couldn't get wherever you were going. No matter what the call was, people trapped, whatever, you couldn't get there just because of the flooded roadways, that the driveways were washed out, the bridges were washed out. And that went on for about 2 to 3 hours. Finally made it back to the station. We found out that the funeral had to be postponed because of the heavy rain. They couldn't get to the graveside to where they were going, so recalled out of the county, career people back to the county, and then I got called into the city to help with the city services and rescues. And I do remember, like everybody else, the market building being flooded, Wiener Stand having water over their countertops. I remember the Wasena Park, the locomotive that was there was pushed off its foundation and turned almost sideways. And that's a huge and very heavy piece of locomotive. And the water was so swiftly, it pushed it off. I remember the Roanoke Memorial Hospital flooded. We couldn't get to the emergency room. We couldn't get to a lot of places that we needed to get to. We had to improvise to take patients into the hospitals. We had just a lot of things going on. And it wasn't just in the Roanoke Valley. Everybody was experiencing it, from Buchanan to Salem. We heard one of our firefighter paramedics in Salem that got washed away. But then we had no cell phones. We had no social media. We didn't know the outcomes a lot until we either read about it or we got back to the station. Somebody made a phone call to tell us everything was okay. Back then, we also didn't have 911. Everybody was using the 7-digit number to call.
Pause?
Yeah.
There wasn't 911?
There was a 7-digit number that you called for it.
668.
Yeah, that's it. So, and no cell phones, no social media, no nothing as it relates to that. Plus, we'd had no warning. That morning we went into it, we had some rain, but nothing that was going to indicate we would have some type of catastrophic event. So as the day went on, we started clearing vehicles that we found in the water, make sure there's nobody hurt. And then I got assigned to a civilian boat to the Ninth Street Industrial Park because we had a lot of people trapped in the Ninth Street Industrial Park, Fred Whitaker Building, and all the businesses down there because all that was flooded 2 and 3 feet. So I went in there, and I was going in with a civilian boat, kind of like a runabout, and we made it just down Industry Avenue and struck a fire hydrant, and the boat sank. So myself and the 2 civilians with me walked into an area where we could stand up. And then shortly after that, I radioed in what was going on, and the city had already called the Coast Guard. So they had a Sikorsky helicopter come in and was rescuing people. And then we had Lifeguard 10 that did a lot of rescues, E.J. Thomas Market. They had some stuff going on in Salem. They were picking people off roofs and things of that nature. Then they called in the Coast Guard. And so I was assigned to the Ninth Street Industrial Park and tried to help, manage that. And so the Coast Guard came in. It was wonderful. They're great people. They came in, they sat down, they picked us up along with about 10 people that were stranded in there, lifted them up, and we went to the airport. And then I remember the captain, I think he was the captain of the Coast Guard, he says, "Can you stay?" I said, "What do you mean?" "We don't know where we're in Roanoke." So I spent the next 5 to 6 hours on the Coast Guard helicopter airlifting people out because, again, no GPS, no navigation system. So as calls would come in, I would navigate the Coast Guard to where they needed to be. And I think it was like 45 or 50 people we airlifted out. One was pregnant and was going into labor. I remember getting her out, taking her to the airport, and then offloading her on ambulance. And we refueled 3 or 4 times. But, as I was only like 22 at the time. And so this was a very memorable and embedded moment in my mind about what took place. And then after that night, our job was to start working and making sure that all the cars that we found that were overturned, all the houses that were flooded out, we had to go through and clear them, make sure there was nobody still in them, nobody was trapped. All that took about 3 or 4 days. And then, like Tardy indicated, it took Roanoke so long to recover, because just think about, the bank buildings downtown were flooded. The businesses were flooded. And not only that, you had a lot of basements that were flooded for just private homes, and we didn't have the resource to do it. Also, back then, there was absolutely no training whatsoever to deal with flooding events. There was no equipment like we have today, our swift water teams. There was no understanding about going into flooded waters with your full turnout gear on. That's a big no-no, but nobody told us that wasn't the right thing to do. So, we've come a long ways then. And as I moved up in the ranks, one of the things I did in 2005 was form our swift water team. And we got a grant to do that. And shortly after that, we did have a flood, another one that flooded the Victory Stadium. And I remember us rescuing people on backhoes that were down there doing some work to the stadium. And without that team, they may not have made it. But it was only within 2 months of us putting that team in place that we had that event. And it's probably one of the busiest specialty teams that we have. But it's the people that stood up and say, I want to do this, Chief. We want to be part of this team. And that's how we started. Salem started the first one. We came in behind Salem. And so that's where we are today. But, flood of 85, again, you couldn't get there from here. You're talking about an hour and a half to 2 hours getting to where you need to be. I don't think it was people coming in. I think it was all the major arteries being clogged, and people now forced into the smaller ways of getting home, and they couldn't get there. And I remember just driving around in an ambulance or driving around a response vehicle, and you couldn't get there because of the flooding. I mean, the Bennington was closed. I do remember that 460 was completely isolated. From 13th Street down, the only way you can get to 460 is either come up 81 or do the Parkway. And that only way you can get to Vinton is the same way because of the isolation that occurred. And we had no fire protection down 460, so we were working with our EMS protection. So Vinton was helping us out down there because we couldn't get our resources down there because of the bridges were flooded, both on the Dale Avenue side as well as the Orange Avenue side. And it's just, there's a lot of stories, a lot of heroic stories that took place that day because everybody just kind of rolled their sleeves up and said, how do we make things happen? And we had people pitching in, just like the guy offered his private runabout boat. Hey, we can go in and pull people out. Well, the water was so swift, he couldn't navigate it. And then it hit that hydrant and down it went. And so it was, it's just things you just don't think about, but they're willing to help and try to do good things. And there was a lot of good things happening during that time and afterwards that people were jumping in, how can we help? And I do remember that. Everybody was asking.
I love that. I love that sense of community. When we're talking about swift water, during the flood of 85, and you may or may not know this, Chief, but was swiftwater rescue a thing at all in the country and just not something we really had here? Or was it really a specialty that hadn't developed yet?
I think it was part of some larger areas that had the technology to do that. We had flat bottom boats, the Roanoke Lifesaving Crew, which I was a volunteer was as well. We had flat bottom boats, but they weren't designed for swift water. I do remember we were getting people out of the market building and putting them in our boats, but they were standing on counters, and we would go up to the business and hop them into the flat bottom boat and then ferry them on to dry land. But no, to my knowledge, there was no structure associated with that. And it didn't really come into being until, you got these major events, and that's really was the driving force. How can we do things better? And that's where we are today. I think we've got a very robust team. We got great regional cooperation. Because back then, Roanoke County was hit as hard as we were. Things that went on at Hollins College, the people trapped there. Stuff was going on in Cave Spring area. Salem was just decimated with Lakeside being flooded. And then Franklin County the same way. And I remember Buchanan had gotten just wiped out because of the James River being overflowing. You hear all these things, but just think about it. You don't hear them unless you watch TV. That was the only time we actually knew the severity of what was going on. And that's only after they did the video, went back, uploaded it, and they were able to play it. So it was hours before we really knew the complete impact we had as it relates to the valley and what happened. So it's been, we've come a long ways, but it was very impactful.
Got all those pockets of places you could get to and not get to.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know to get back to Salem, I had to get on at 581 and 81.
Mm-hmm.
But you could see all the devastation. So they just opened Center in the Square 2 weeks earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Mill Mountain Theater was totally filled up to the ceiling with water. So it took a long time to reopen that. And I remember looking down at the Hotel Roanoke and the red light down there, the water was up above the red light.
Yep.
And I never realized water could be so damaging. Like all of the parking lot that I had parked in that I left was totally torn up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like so much devastation.
The power of water is just amazing. And really didn't truly understand the power until I saw that very large locomotive, equivalent to the 611, that was shifted off the tracks and had to be, righted. Yeah. That is just, you would never think that power would be able to move that in the way it did. And then and you're talking about the Brown Robinson Park, that is no longer a community because of flood mitigation issues. Shortly after that, I worked for emergency management for the city. That was one of our focuses, to mitigate by the property so that we don't have these situations in the future, and we did that. So it was, we tried to pull people out of harm's way, not build in the right-of-ways of where the flood is, and that's what you see a lot now between the bench cuts and everything else. I know that's for a different podcast, but a lot has happened, and I think that Roanoke is a better place and more resilient place for what has happened. And now that we know where the areas are, we can warn them. We can get better forecasting. We can forecast where the river's going to be to the half a foot or a tenth of a foot now, and they're spot on. And it's really amazing how that works.
I agree. I love sort of like following the through the shark system and seeing the levels of the river. I mean, all the way from Salem through the county into the city. So yeah, it's pretty remarkable what we're able to do here. So we've kind of walked through the devastation of this event. To sort of wrap it up today, I'm gonna take a cue from Chief Hoback here. What really struck me from your story was the sense of community afterwards and people stepping up and wanting to help. Can you all sort of leave me with one instance of sort of the aftermath that was hopeful, and what happened after the storm that sort of is a good memory?
So from the library side, it was like, you really described it well. It's like these pockets of places that were okay, and all these other places you either couldn't get to. So Hollins was really, for several reasons, Hollins University or Hollins College at that point bothered me a lot as far as worrying, because I had actually been offered the job at that library at Hollins 3 years earlier, and I had taken the city position. But I knew the librarians at Hollins, and I knew that they couldn't get off campus. And I knew later that the library was practically destroyed to the point where they were bringing in freezers from like the National Archives and all that. So in the national, like the Smithsonian, all of that resources were coming into Roanoke, and they were putting books into the freezer so they wouldn't mold. And so that's why they built the new library up on the other side of campus. That took a while, but I was very close-knit with the librarians, and so we did help them. Is that the one story at Hollins? It was a good story, but a scary story. There was some gentleman that one of my friends at the Hollins Library knew had come to repair like phone lines or something, and he was in a building, and the water started rising, and he literally had like an inch to breathe before it started receding. And so, but they were there 3 days, to Tinker Creek.
Below. It was not Tinker Creek. It was actually the water comes out of Carbon's Cove. Oh. Because the dam at Carbon's Cove overflowed because it couldn't hold any more water. And that's what flooded Hollins College. And he was literally in the basement, submerged with a pocket of air for 2.5 days?
It was really scary. You just can't explain.
You can't explain some of the things that went on that couple of days. And again, you didn't know it until you knew it, because it wasn't instant communications.
Somebody didn't have a phone out.
You just happened to know people that knew them.
Yeah. Wow.
it was very scary. I think that, okay, you mentioned that they talk about exactly what the flood level is. I hate to, it made me start thinking, I watch it, and there was one time it was getting closer to the 85 height. I mean, it's, if you remember the height of the 85, you're like, oh, okay, we're like 10 feet below that. But it does make me nervous when I see a lot of rain.
Yep.
Like, because you're like, okay, yeah.
What's the tipping point?
Yeah. I would like to add this because I don't know if you remember, it was brought up in one of our meetings that there was one flood event relatively recently, but one of the city employees actually went back and examined the records from the 85, and there was a certain storm drain downtown that was obscured, and he actually took a crew out and noticed that it was also messed up, so he fixed it, and the flooding was less. And I thought that was one of the most amazing. He was just amazing that he thought to go back and look at the records. I thought that was, so again, I think that Fire-EMS Police and everyone has done a really amazing job to prevent it, but it could happen again. I mean, once you've seen it, you believe it could happen again.
Sure. And the one thing stormwater always reminds me, we're located by a river. If there's water, it can flood.
Right.
So, yeah. What about you, Lieutenant Tardy? What's something positive you can think of in the aftermath?
This may be part of one of your future plans, but out of it, they spent, and I can't remember how long, I know it was a long time, basically changing the river. They've shaved off, the Roanoke River wasn't as wide, and some of the turns were a lot worse than they are now. So out of that, they got that done, and it won't prevent it entirely, but it certainly can handle more water more efficiently. So that is a great thing that came out of this, because I don't want to live long enough to see that again. It was, as I said, I missed the water because I was in court, but seeing the aftermath, I don't care to go through that again if I can avoid it.
Right. I totally understand that. Chief, what about you? Is there something specific that stands out to you in the aftermath?
Well, as we went through the days that followed, we saw a lot of good in Roanoke, really did. And we were out, and like the police department, and I do remember one specific area, Piedmont Park, got hit really hard. We actually had a house that burned completely down because fire trucks or nobody could get to it because the flood water was just so much we couldn't. And then we went into there after the flood water had receded, and we saw people come from all over the place to help clean their house out. And because we went in and said, obviously there's not a lot we can do, but we're just, first of all, making sure that everybody's safe, making sure that, they have, the essential stuff to be able to, sheltering goes, because part of my job was emergency management and one of the paramedics, but our host department was emergency management. So we became part of the sheltering. We became part of a lot of things. And so as we did that, we just saw people just step up and say, no, they can come stay with us. We're good, helping them clean out, wash out their house, the positivity of the people that this is not going to run them out. And, and one thing I do remember, we had another event that took place, and it was Hugo that came through. And that was 89, and I got promoted up to Deputy Coordinator Emergency Management. And Hugo was predicted to have catastrophic rainfall in Roanoke, and we're very fortunate it didn't. But I remember going down back to that neighborhood, and those people were still there. They recognized me, I recognized them. They said, we're good, we're going to get out of here, but we're good. So, the resilience of people in Roanoke and what they weren't, angry. They were just, they were sad, but they were very resilient. And that really kind of uplifted you when you talk about it, about how people are. And that was just a small section that I was responsible for, not the whole city and what everybody else experienced. Northwest got hit hard, Southwest got hit hard. But just what I saw, the slice of pie that I had, it was amazing about how people were helping people. And that's a good thing. And that's what, that enriches my heart about what Roanoke's all about.
I agree. And I think that is the perfect place to wrap this up in an episode that, is remembering some pretty traumatic events. It also can be the birthplace for a very resilient community, and for a community that still comes together and helps each other. So I like coming out of the tragedy and the floodwaters into a place of peace and calm. So thank you all for being here with me today. Thank you for traveling Memory Road. And for everybody watching, please join us next week when we go into our present day actions and how we are working to help mitigate some of the flooding around the Roanoke River. This is If You Know, You Know, and we'll catch you next time.